Nice to see you all today. How many of you were around here in 1972? You weren't here, Sarah? Were you like 4 years out at that point? They can't do math in their head that quickly. We had a place on Canisius Lake in 72, and it rained, 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 and it rained. And we had a Chris Craft boat in a boat hoist, and by the time it stopped raining, the water was over the top of the boat hoist. And I went up and tied the Chris Craft on one end to the boat hoist and to the other end on the house. And down here in Canandaigua, the water came up over Eastern Boulevard so high that the cars that tried to go down there were stalled out. And there were cars all over the place stalled out because the water came up and did that. We had our place down in the southern tier that my grandfather owned at that time. My cousin owns it now. And there are a whole lot of little bridges that you had to take to get in the back roads, and every single one of them was washed out. The county and the towns had to come and replace them all. It was Hurricane Agnes, and we didn't even get the worst of it. The worst of it was down in the southern tier and the northern tier of Pennsylvania. I guess they call that a 100-year flood. If you go down to, past Naples and down towards Bath, there's a little town called Avoca, and if you drive down through there, you'll see there's a berm that they put up along the edge of the Cohocton River. So in case that ever happens again, it won't flood the town out completely. It blew the barn doors off? The wind? I couldn't hear you. Your house? It was a mess. Yeah, I'll never forget that. I can remember people in waders down there on Lakeshore and on 5 and 20 trying to save things, trying to put sandbags in, and it really caused a lot of damage. They say that in the southern tier, this kind of morose, but the caskets popped right out of the ground because they had the sealed concrete crypts, and the weight of the thing was lessened by the water, and they popped out. So that it was really a huge problem. And I'm telling you that because, every once in a while bad things happen. And I don't know if you've ever gone to get a mortgage. Somewhere in the clause, it will say, if this property is in a flood zone, you have to carry flood insurance. Well, what's in a flood zone? Well, I'm sorry? Closer? I could hear myself very well. That if it's in a flood zone, then you have to carry separate flood insurance. My friend Mike Oliver lives on the coast of the Gulf of America. And, if you look at the map, well, first of all, Mexico is in America. No extra charge for that. But if you look at the map, most of the Gulf of Mexico is in the United States. And we won't go, there's a reason why he did that. This is totally beside the point. Because there's some rules concerning the Gulf of Mexico that don't apply to the Gulf of America, so it's really kind of a smart thing to do. But my friend Mike, who some of you know, he's been here to preach before, he owns 2 Airbnbs right on the coast. And when this last hurricane came up through, it destroyed both of them. And last time he was here, he was telling me, at that time he only owned one of them, and he was telling me that his homeowner's insurance was nearly $10,000 a year to cover that, because every few years, they don't know how often, but every few years, a hurricane is going to come up into the Gulf of Mexico and destroy something somewhere. And so it's like life. You never know what's going to clobber you or when it's going to clobber you. So I want to talk to you about scripture in the book of Proverbs today. And Bob and Barb, we've been doing a series on wisdom. And so this is a continuation of it, but this is a four-parter that I'm starting today. And it's Proverbs chapter 30, verses 24 through 28. There are four things that are small on the earth, but they're exceedingly wise. The ants are not a strong people, but they prepare their food in the summer. The rock badgers are not a mighty people, yet they make their houses on the rocks. The locusts have no king, yet all of them go out in ranks. And the lizard you may grasp with the hands, yet is in the king's palaces. And so today I want to talk about the second one that's mentioned here, the rock badgers, that they make their houses in the rocks. So if you read this and you say, well, these four things are wise. These four creatures are wise. Well, how is the rock badger wise? And let's take a look at this a little bit. These four, next slide please, these four things have more wisdom than the philosophers. Next slide. Matthew chapter 7. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on a rock. Luke puts it this way. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I tell you? I will show you what someone is like who comes to me, hears my words, and acts on them. That one is like the man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundations on the rock. When a flood arose, a river burst against the house but could not shake it because it had been well built. Matthew says it this way. The rain fell, the floods came, the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on a rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain fell, the floods came, the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell, and great was its fall. Luke says it this way. The one who hears and does not act is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. When the river burst against it, immediately it fell, and great was the ruin of the house. So I want to talk to you about several clauses within these two passages this morning. What is it that needs to be done in order to have a good foundation? And the answer is to build your life, because this passage is not about building houses. This is about building your life. And Jesus said that the wise foundation are his words. The words are there for everybody. It's up to each individual to decide if they're going to act upon the words or not. And Luke says, why do you call me Lord, Lord, but you don't do what I say? That's how his passage starts. There are a whole lot of people around that they'll say, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, but they don't act on the words. Now, Don took me fishing last, was it Monday? One of those days. It was one of the days where it was the night, whatever day was nice. The sky was blue and we went out. And as usual, we didn't catch anything except a couple pickerel, which we threw back because they're bony, nasty things. They're hard to clean. And Don told me that the best way to eat a pickerel is to gut it and put it in a grinder and grind the bones up and make a fish patty. And I never thought of that, but I'm not about to do it. So we threw them back. But it was interesting. Excuse me. We went in and put in down in Woodville and came up the West Lake Road. And, you know, I observe things a lot of times during the week, and I noticed that there were a lot of houses built on the rock down there. They're up, I'm sorry, they're up high. Where are we here? Do it one more, please. There we go. They're up high, and they have either elevators or stairs. They come down to a little teeny stretch of beach and a dock that goes out in a 45,000 boat moored there. And nobody, well, I shouldn't say nobody, but most of them are not built. Thank you, Ariel. You are a wonderful daughter. But which lots are worth more, the level lake or the ones up on the hill? Does it cost more for a cliff or on Seneca Point? It's $45 million a foot on level lake. It's expensive on the cliff too, and there's that extra tax. Do you have to pay the extra tax for Lakeview, Bob? Yeah, that sucks. Enhanced view, yeah. They know how to get you. But the ones that are on level, they cost more, but are they the safest? They're not the safest. I mean, when that flood happened in '72, the downstairs of all of those cottages were, well, they aren't cottages, but all those fancy, they were pretty well water soaked. They had to tear everything out and replace them. And so even though it's nice to be able to walk out of your house and go right out to the lake, it's not the safest because there will be a 100-year flood. There will be another storm like that eventually, maybe in 2072, but there will be another flood. And that's what happens to somebody who says, Lord, Lord, but doesn't follow what Jesus teaches. Now, sometimes I mention my Jewish friend, and he says, well, you know, all you people are Christians. I say, yeah, but most of the people around are cultural Christians. They do Christmas, they do Easter, they do Palm Sunday. Well, some do Palm Sunday. The rest of them go to the fire department and work over there on Palm Sunday. But the idea is that most people, if you ask them around here, what is your religion, they would say, we're Christians. Wouldn't they? For the most part, they might say, we're Catholics, which is a form of Christianity, or we're Baptist. But not everybody that says that, in fact, a small percentage, actually have a worldview that's based on the sayings and the teachings of Jesus, so that their life is what they believe. Most folks ignore what Jesus says. They just say that they're Christians because their parents were, you know, Lutherans, or their parents were Catholics, or whatever. So cultural Christianity is kind of what Jesus was talking about. Why do you call me Lord, but don't base your life on my words? Next slide, please. So people have a choice to make. Now here, this was the most magnificent project probably ever done in the town of South Bristol. I remember when they were starting to build these things. You know, you couldn't build these today. There's no way you could get permits to put these in today. But they built these condominiums down there in Bristol Harbor. We had a visitor here last week that's moving to Bristol Harbor, and they said they'll be back. But when you bought a condo in Bristol Harbor, you got to put your boat in the slip down there, and there was an elevator that you could take down. And what's not shown on the picture to the left of the elevator is a beach where you could go down and hang out with your kids. They brought sand in there, and pretty expensive. Those places are pretty expensive even now, and they were at the time. But the thing is, no matter how much rain we get, it's not going to affect those places. They're built on the rock. The foundations are right into the rock. Now, I don't know if you know this. This is a little story, the history of the church here, but before 1937, there was no basement here. And it was a little bit different in the front. There was a baptistry here so that the people could be baptized by immersion right here in the church. And there were choir pews. There were 3 of them that sat this way. And this rail came around here and it went this way. So the choir seats were at floor level on this side. So one day they decided that they would dig the basement out. 1937, I think, maybe 36, right in that vicinity somewhere. And they got down there with a shovel, and guess what? They found out that the church is built on a rock. And they dug down just a little bit, and they found that it's completely and totally rock. So they did what anybody would do. They went to the Coy Street Hardware and bought dynamite. And they blasted the whole basement out with dynamite. And you can't see it now since we put the seats in, but just about where Sean is sitting, where that pew was, a rock blew up through the floor, and the crack was, it's still there, you can see it, but it's under the carpet now. This place is built on the rock. It's not going anywhere. And some of these other houses, they've run into rock as well in this area. Manhattan Island. How are they able to put all those skyscrapers there? Because the island is a huge bedrock. And therefore, they're able to build all of those places, all those skyscrapers. But people have a choice to make. How will I build? First of all, second or 10th of all, the idea of a house is more than just a place to live or a place to worship. A house is a dynasty. A house is a person and a person's family and everything that a person owns. Biblically speaking, that's what it says, the house of David. It's talking about all his descendants. It's talking about all of his wealth, all of his knowledge, and so forth. And so the house of David will produce the Messiah. So when we talk about the house, we're talking about our personal understanding about life. Our worldview needs to be built on the teachings of Jesus. Why don't people agree with us politically? Many times because we're wrong, but usually because they have a different worldview than we do. Because we have a worldview, hopefully, based on what Jesus taught and what Jesus said. And when they don't have that foundation, when they didn't learn anything about God in Sunday school, and they grew up without any religion whatsoever, and they grow up and then their teachers are other people who have no biblical worldview, and so they start to think of things, and a lot of times it's in conflict with what God would have us to believe and what God would have us to think. So people have a choice on how to build their life, and it doesn't really matter at what point you make the choice. It's best if you make it when you're a kid and then don't go through all kinds of problems with drugs and divorces and all kinds of bad things that can happen in life. It's best to start as a kid, but at any point you can begin to build your life on the teachings of Jesus, and it will help for the rest of your life. And it's not just me. I mean, we're Americans and we're individualists and we're pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and all of this kind of stuff in our culture. But it is a communal thing as well, because the house of God are the people of God. And to the extent that the people of God are together, we'll talk about that more when it talks about the locusts. says the locusts have no king, yet they work together. So that'll be a different sermon. People will experience storms. How many pictures did you see from this hurricane that happened in the Carolinas within the last year of houses being washed down the river when the river is, I mean, how high does the river have to get? If you look at this picture carefully, you'll see that the river has come underneath the foundation of the house, and the building that's standing next to this house is also going to fall if things don't stop. Do we want our life to end up like that? What's the problem? Now, I think that you'll see with these two passages in Matthew and Luke, you'll see that it's not just about the type of soil that the building is built on, it's also about where the building is built. Now, it is true in Luke, it does say the storm comes and busts against the house. However, the house that's built on the rock is not going to be too close to the river. Well, it's nice to have a place on the river. It's nice to have your boat. 99 years out of 100, it's a good place to live. But when that storm comes, it rips these. How many houses were lost? How many people were lost in that hurricane this last year? Literally, wasn't it just hundreds of people that were killed? And it's because they built their house on sand. Well, what is sand? Sand is, well, it's partly seashells, but it's mostly rocks that have been broken down over a cajillion years. The waves have come and it hit the rock and hit the rock and hit the rock. And the best places to go to the beach are where there's good sand. Now, there's a lot of places that, have big rocks on the beach, and it's not the same as going to Fort Lauderdale or Clearwater or anything like that. I can see why people want to build by the beautiful river. That storm in 72, I think it's the Norfolk and Southern Railroad that goes through that Canisteo Valley that we overlook where we hunt. And that river took the railroad out from Hornell to Corning. And they had to rebuild it. I mean, that's how powerful those gushes of water can be. And there are storms in life. There are sicknesses. There are bankruptcies. There are things that really can wreck your life. And if you don't have the proper foundation, it can wreck you. But if you have the proper foundation and you know that God's in charge and that He is with you and you're doing everything you can to follow His words, that is a real helpful thing in the storms of life. He who hears these words and does not act, they tell us that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And it's true in life, too. You say something nasty to somebody, they're going to say something nasty back to you. Even if you say something nice to somebody, they might say something nasty back to you. And if you pick up on it and you give it right back to them, it's going to cause a problem. The sands of time, the sands are beaten down rocks. And it's not a good place to build on the beach. First of all, the tide comes up. Do you remember a few years ago when the tsunami completely destroyed the southern tip of Japan? My mom always talked about tidal waves. Well, a tidal wave might come. And, I didn't know anything about tidal waves. I didn't know they were caused by earthquakes. But in Japan, there were markers. And the markers said, do not build beyond this point. And they were all along that area that was flooded. And generation came, generation went, generation came, generation went. And eventually somebody said, well, you know, there's nice beaches down there. I think I would like to build a house down there. I'd like to put a business down there. And the warning line was there, don't build further than this. Because how did they find that line? The last time it happened, the government or somebody said, let's put up markers so that this doesn't happen again. And they ignored it. And whoosh, in came the tidal wave. Out, sucked all hundreds of people, their houses, their boats, everything was sucked out. They were built in a place that was not a proper foundation. The only proper foundation is the words of Jesus. Now one day, Jesus was in Caesarea Philippi. Next slide, please. And he said to the disciples, who do men say that I am? And they said, well, some say that you're Elijah, and some say you're one of the prophets of old, and some say you're this one or that one. And Jesus looked at the disciples, he said, who do you say that I am? And Peter came up with the correct answer. Next slide. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said to him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you. Now, Simon Bar-Jonah means Simon, the son of Jonah. This is his given name. When he was named by his parents, he was named Simon after the Old Testament patriarch Simeon. But Jesus called him Peter. And guess some sort of emergency. Is that something we need to pray about? Okay. Just needs to go. Okay. It says, Jesus called Simon Bar-Jonah Peter, which means rockhead. Rock. It's the same root word in Greek as petrified. Peter, the rock. And he didn't say that as a positive thing. He said it because Peter was a knucklehead. And Peter always had, do you know any Christian knuckleheads? There are maybe a few around. And so Jesus called him the rock, which meant he was unbending. And Peter said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said, God has revealed this to you. You're blessed. God has showed you this truth. Next slide. Notice that in verse 17, his name is Simon Bar-Jonah. In verse 18, his name is Peter. And he says, upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not overpower it. Now, what is the rock? Some would say it's Peter. Others would say it's the confession that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Catholic people would say, well, Jesus is saying to Peter, you're going to be the first pope. And Protestants would say, no, maybe Peter would be the first pope. He was the Bishop of Rome. We do know that. However, it's the confession that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. That confession is what the church is built on. Because no matter what Christian there is in the world, ever was or ever will be, which is what the universal church means, it is built on the confession, the rock, that Jesus Christ is the Son of the living God. This is the most basic teaching of all Christianity, that Jesus is the only one. Jesus is the only way. All religions are not the same. Some are better than others. And so Peter gets it at this time, and he is mentioned to be Peter. Next slide, please. It says in Ephesians, Paul writing to a church in Ephesus, "So then you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and are of God's household, having been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets." Now, coming from a Pentecostal background, which I do, they interpret it to mean modern day apostles or prophets. And that was just the general understanding among the Pentecostals. That was, if you read that to them, that's how they interpreted it. But if you read other writings, like the Didache and other early writings of the church, when it says the apostles and prophets, it's talking about the Bible. The law of Moses, the prophets, and the writings of the apostles in New Testament. So just like Jesus said, those who act on my words, they're like those who build on the rock. And in Luke it says, they dig down deep. Matthew doesn't say it that way, but Luke says you have to dig down and get to that bedrock. It's not building it on a little bunch of gravel. It's the solid rock underneath. And it says Jesus being the cornerstone, which is the most important rock. You know, we have ceremonial cornerstones. If you go down to the First United Methodist Church, in the corner of that building, there's a little rock with a date on it. That's what we call a cornerstone, but in biblical times, a building was built and the measurements all were taken off the cornerstone. It would be perfectly square stone, and it would be perfect length each way, and they would take a level, and they would measure everything would be measured from that cornerstone. So everything would be perfect. So if you followed that cornerstone around and came around all four sides, it would come back perfectly to the same place. And so the church is said to be built on the foundation of the Word of God, and Jesus himself is being the chief cornerstone, in whom we are being built together. You're being built, I'm being built. You know, you have to be a little bit open to teaching. You know, just because the Pentecostals said that means modern day apostles and prophets, and sometimes you have to change your mind on some things when more light comes to you, and that's really important for growth. So many times people they read something and then they think. One time somebody said to me, we were studying some book, forgot what it was. This was years and years ago. We were studying some biblical book. They said, I don't need to come to that. I studied that 15 years ago in such and such a place. Well, I can tell you something. You could study that same book every year for the rest of your life, and you get something new out of it every single time. So it's a communal thing, and it's an individual thing. No man can lay a foundation other than the one that is laid, which is Jesus. If any man builds on the foundation with gold and silver and precious stones, wood, hay, or straw, you got two choices on how you build. If you go and see straw houses in Africa, houses made out of mud, we don't need that kind of building in the church. Each man's work or each person's work will become evident, for the day will show it, because it's to be revealed with fire, and the fire itself will test the quality of each man's work. Eventually, the storm will come, and when the storm comes, it will remain or it won't. The good thing is that there's a lot of mercy in that too, because it goes on to say, well, even if you lose the stuff you built, you'll still be saved. That's cool. But the foundation is Jesus Christ. Are there any comments? There are four things that are exceedingly wise. One of them is the rock badger. Got a mic there, Crystal? Gene and Keith are not here today, and so we can't count on them to help out in this section of the service. So who has something to say?
So, thinking about this church in the basement, what my dad told me was, so he was a young man, I think about 18, when they dug the basement out, and they had to use the dynamite, but then every single bit of stone and rubble that was taken out of here was taken out with wheelbarrows, people who volunteered to come and work here. And so this church has a long history of banding together to
It says
get
in
things done.
the church minutes that they had mules too.
Yep.
And they had a scraper that they would bring in and get the stone that they blown out and draw it out with mules and a scraper, and then take it in a wheelbarrow.
Yeah. So it was quite a project.
Yeah, we're gonna have a meeting like that soon so that we can you imagine?
No. The hard work that they did. Yeah.
And the people that paid for this building, they paid for this building in cash when they built it.
Mm-hmm.
Some people donated the foundation stones as their, they didn't have cash to give, but they brought stones down from their farm, and those are in the walls out there.
Mm-hmm.
Good point. Anyone else? Sarah saying, "Don't you call on me." I know what that smile means. All right, well, nice to see you, Bob and Barb. Thanks for coming. May God bless everybody. Have a good day, and we'll see you next time.